Okay, welcome back. Now, of course, the parliamentarians beginning a short while ago their debate on the Russia-Ukraine war. The leader of the opposition, that's the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen, is first up. Let's take you live there.
Talking about the shameful abstention in the United Nations vote. When ANC ministers attend a cocktail function glorifying the might of the Russian army on the very day of the invasion, you don't have to read between the lines. When a lone call from Durko for Russia to withdraw its troops is hastily retracted and the minister admonished, you don't have to read between the lines. And when our president calls Putin between the middle of his invasion, pledging to strengthen bilateral support for him while the rest of the world isolates him, you don't have to read between the lines. To the astonishment of the world, the very same ANC that relied on global solidarity to fight oppression has now openly sided with the oppressor. It has picked the wrong side of history, and it has dragged 60 million South Africans along with it. And why? Is it because Russia once supported South Africa's liberation struggle? But that wasn't Russia. It was the Soviet Union. And that solidarity included Ukraine, the very country being attacked. This was also a long time ago, and at what stage does Russia's recent actions cancel out that historical goodwill? Is it then because it's in our country's economic interests? And I can assure you it's not that either. Russia is only our 38th largest trading partner, accounting for around 0.5% of our exports and our imports. That's less than 1.4% of our trade with NATO countries. And yet we shun our own economic partners in favor of a global pariah. But if it's not in South Africa's interests, then whose interests is it in? And to answer that, you only need to look at Russia's expansion into Africa through so-called elite capture, where pliable leaders are ensnared in long-term patronage schemes. 15 African countries currently have Russian-financed nuclear deals, and many more locked into Russian security contracts. Also consider that a businessman close to Putin tried to run a disinformation campaign in the 2019 election to favor the ANC, and that the ANC's largest donor last year was a Putin-backed oligarch. When you connect these dots, the full picture of why the ANC support for Russia starts to emerge. Now, there are some who say that this is not our war to become involved in, but that is simply not true. We may be 9,000 kilometers away, but we will soon feel its effect in every single aspect of South African life. When the oil price skyrockets through to 30 to 40 rand, as it's been predicted, this will be our war too. When diesel becomes so expensive that Eskom can no longer burn its turbines, and when the lights go out, they stay out, this will be our war too. When the spiraling cost of importing and transporting food is passed on to consumers who already struggle to make ends meet and feed their families, and we see a large increase in malnutrition, this will be our war too. And when all of this food and insecurity and inflation results in a breakdown of law and order that will make last year's July riots look like child play, this will be our war too. We are already involved, and there is no such thing as a neutral position. As the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu famously said, when you choose the side of the oppressor in situations of, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you've chosen the side of the oppressor. Countries that choose the wrong side of history will live with this tag for generations to come. It shouldn't be the hard thing to do, to put country ahead of party and to do the right thing. Honourable members, the ANC does not speak for South Africa on this, and it certainly doesn't speak for the DA. We condemn Russia's illegal invasion in the strongest terms, and we stand firmly with the people of Ukraine. And I urge President Ramaphosa to rethink the position of his government. Think of the plight of the Ukraine. Think of South Africa's place in the world, and think about what this war is going to mean for all of us as South Africans. Choose peace, condemn Russia. Thank you.
The line. Of course, it's in line.
Thank you. Honorable the Deputy Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Honorable Mashego Dlamini.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Greetings to our Chief Whip, ministers who are present here, honorable members. After the democratic election in 1994, South Africa ceased to be the parade of the world. It regained its rightful place in Africa, in the United Nations, and in the family of nations. We emerged as a democratic country into a fundamental transformed world. The development of South Africa's post-apartheid foreign policy is guided by the 7 principles, which are a belief in human rights which extend beyond the political, embracing the economy, social and environmental issues. A belief that just and lasting solution to the problem of humankind can only come through the promotion of democracy worldwide. A belief that justice and international law should guide the relations between the nations. A belief that international peace in the goal to which all nations should strive, where this breakdown, internationally agreed peace mechanism to solve conflict should be resorted to. A belief that our foreign policy should reflect the interests of the continent of Africa. A belief that South African economic development depend on growing regions and international economic cooperation in an independent world. A belief that our foreign relations must mirror our deep commitment, the consolidation of democracy, democratic South Africa. Deputy Speaker, South Africa's approach on the Russian-Ukraine matters has been based on the following key principles, which in turn are based on the foreign policy, to expressing deep concern at the violation of the UN Charter and international law, the loss of life, the humanitarian impact, and the forced displacement of people as a result of war in Ukraine. Recognizing the armed conflict would no doubt result in human suffering and destruction, the effect of which will not only affect Ukraine, but also reverberate across the world. No country is immune to the effect of this conflict. As the UN Secretary General has indicated, the conflict will have a huge impact on the global economy in a moment when we are emerging from COVID-19 pandemic, and so many developing countries absolutely need to have space for recovery. South Africa emphasizes respect to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. On the 9th of September 2021, BRICS leaders have expressed concern at the continuing conflict and violence in the different parts of the world. The BRICS leaders reaffirmed their commitment to the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of states and reiterated that all conflicts must be resolved by peace means and through political and diplomatic effort in line with the international law, that is the UN Charter. Deputy Speaker, as a nation built through negotiation, South Africa is always appreciative of the potential dialogue has in averting a crisis and de-escalating conflict. In line with our strong commitment to the peace resolution of conflict, South Africa urges all parties to devote increased effort to diplomacy and to find a solution that will help avert further escalation. The door of diplomacy should never be closed even as conflict has broken out. South Africa urges all parties to approach the situation in a spirit of compromise, with all sides respecting international law. Peaceful resolution of the matters can
on a point of order.
by all parties in diplomatic
Honorable
effort.
members, the order. No, can you please not do that? You are interrupting the speaker.
Yes.
It is irresponsible and it's not okay. Please finish your remarks, madam.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Speaker. South Africa urges all parties to approach the situation in a spirit of compromise, with all sides respecting international law. Peaceful resolution of matter can be achieved by all parties if diplomatic efforts to find a solution to the concern raised expressed by Russia resume. Currently, it is critical for all parties to uphold and protect human rights and abide by their obligation in terms of international law and international humanitarian law. South Africa continues to support and encourage regional initiatives such as the Minsk Agreement, and we welcome the work of the Normandy format, the Trilateral Contact Group, and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. South Africa supports the involvement of the good offices of the UN Secretary General, as it could also make a positive contribution in finding a lasting solution to this conflict. In the search of peace, South Africa supports the resolution process of inclusive talk led by the United Nations Security Council to address all the issues of concern to any of these parties. Deputy Speaker, noting that international action must create an environment conducive for diplomacy, dialogue, and mediation. Greater attention must be paid to bringing the sides closer to dialogue and not to take them further apart. The international community should support engagement between the parties in a spirit of compromise while de-escalating tensions, committing them to the cessation of hostilities and building trust and confidence. Ladies and gentlemen, members of parliament, as government of South Africa, we urge all South Africans not to take side on the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, as this could go against our principle. In addition, South Africa has a good bilateral relation in the both countries. I thank you.
Honorable members, honorable member, you are making noise there. You are out of order. Yes, I'm pointing out at you. You are disruptive, sir, and you've been repeating it. It is out of order. You want your members to be listened to, okay? So please behave, man. Just let your members speak because you want them listened to. You too. Otherwise, that's the best way to improve your argument, not by screaming. It's no argument screaming. Go ahead, Honorable Beckman, and appeal to them to listen to you.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. This did not start last month. I've been pushing Durko and the ministers before to take an active and productive opportunity in using their proximity to President Putin to try and persuade him first from occupying the Crimean Peninsula, then from building up military on the borders of Ukraine, and from handing out passports to create instability and friction as per the Georgian script a decade ago. I was not asking South Africa to take sides. I was rather tending them to clean their tarnished and embarrassing world image that has not shone since the Madiba Magic days. Having witnessed the ANC executive catch the ball, pass it, fumble it, and then throw it off sides, and then bench their minister who spoke sense, Durko, the one stable ship of foreign embarrassments, then ran on the field to join government, scoring an own goal at the UN General Assembly, took away our last ounce of credibility as defenders of any form of human rights, with our hypocritical but damagingly loyal excuse for a policy. A week before the Russian invasion, whilst no one believed Russia would unnecessarily invade Ukraine, Embassies still proactively made evacuation plans for their citizens. Some of these included pre-evacuation emergency travel documents and emergency contacts. Contrast this to our embassy that abandoned passports and visas applications when taking themselves to safety. A group of us who had worked together under different DIRCO leadership in repatriating South Africans back during COVID got together to immediately assist in the evacuation of around 200 South Africans, mainly students stranded in the war-torn areas of Ukraine. As the names were being put on the group, the ambassador put politics ahead of South Africa, threatening the group that if my name was not removed, he would remove himself. He then went on to treat the group admin volunteers like his own secretaries and only took info but withheld crucial information that could assist. Furthermore, DIRCO WhatsApps would tell people to stay put. They would say that there is no war, that it is a military operation, and that they cannot get emergency travel documents because these are only issued in exceptional circumstances. Thankfully, the volunteers, headed by Lorraine Blow and Kim Kerr, continued to pull people over their borders thanks to the embassies, foreign embassies, and committed DIRCO heroes, and South Africans being South Africans. DIRCO boasts about their flights, but somehow did not know that people could fly testing positive once recovered from COVID-19. So they still ended up having to assist there too, and with the ones that DIRCO still referred to them. The situation could be helped immediately if stranded Ukrainians with families in South Africa had a visa-free right of passage for at least 6 months, reviewed annually, and if we instructed our embassies in surrounding countries to assist our citizens with emergency travel documents to travel home. Come on, ministers, save face, put your people first and put principle above loyalty. This is war. It does affect South Africa, and your voice must protect our pockets. Thank you.
Honorable Shivambo. Honorable Shivambo.
No, thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. We state here on behalf of the anti-imperialist and anti-colonial economic emancipation movement that there is absolutely nothing wrong with the Russian Federation's preventing the military expansion of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, which is trying to expand its presence towards the borders of the Russian Federation, particularly because NATO is historically known for starting and engaging in neo-colonial and imperialist wars that are aimed at illegally removing government. Enforcement of a so-called no-fly zone in Libya led to the killing of brother leader Muammar Gaddafi and was aimed at pillaging and stealing the gold reserve, currency reserve for the African continent. We will never forgive NATO for the killing of brother leader Muammar Gaddafi.
Honorable Shivambo, maybe you want to switch off your video to improve your bandwidth and so on. Do that. Your reception is pretty bad, yeah. Please go ahead. Honorable members, your job today is to listen, please. And this is your debate.
We will never forgive NATO for the killing of brother leader Muammar Gaddafi, and we'll never forget that this war alliance of NATO destroyed Libya, which was one of the very few economically sovereign countries in the African continent. Now, South Africa's relationship with the Russian Federation is rooted in true bonds of libertarian brotherhood. At the core of the Soviet Union was the Russian Federation, and anyone who argues otherwise is being dishonest. The USSR and Russia in particular dedicated military, political, and ideological resources in the struggle against colonialism and apartheid in South Africa. After the Sharpeville massacre on 21st of March 1960, the Soviet Union was among the first to cut all diplomatic relations with apartheid South Africa. It was essentially the Soviet Union working with the Cuban and Vietnam forces that provided military assistance in the Battle of Quito, the apartheid criminals to negotiate transition in South Africa. The Soviet Union and Russian Federation are not peacetime friends of South Africa, but true friends who must never be abandoned, irrespective of imperialist-sponsored master narratives about the military operations in Ukraine, which are essentially and emphatically aimed at preventing imperialist military expansion in Eastern Europe. South Africa is a member of the BRICS bloc of emerging economies, which essentially gives South Africa's economy access to a market of more than 3 billion people in the world and to more than 32% of the world economy. Our country must never distance itself from BRICS in favor of the erstwhile colonial and neo-colonial masters whose interests are ruthless exploitation of our natural resources. South Africa must not cut its economic relations with the Russian Federation and must instead deepen, broaden, and strengthen our economic, social, and political relations with the Russian Federation, and of course with all BRIC countries. The Russian Federation, like all BRIC countries of Brazil, China, and India, have no colonial and they've got no neo-colonial aspirations, but are instead committed to global peace, stability, and collective prosperity. In the immediate, the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, SAHPRA, must authorize Sputnik V vaccines, and all other relationships must be strengthened so that we have got access to Sputnik V vaccines here in South Africa. And all parts of the progressive world must treat the West isolation of Russia as an opportunity to transition to a new world as an European imperialism and colonialism. Now, in terms of the background, Chairperson, is that the outcomes of the Second World War was, one, the formation of the United Nations, but the colonial masters led by the US and the UK started a war alliance. NATO is a war alliance which is trying to expand its military bases towards Eastern Europe. The United States of America has currently more than 79 of those are in the African continent, including in Botswana, where we have the Africa Command Center. So there is absolutely nothing wrong with the military operations that are taking place in Ukraine to prevent the expansion of NATO, because we know of their sins and what they have done to destroy many parts of the world of overthrowing governments. We stand as the EFF to reaffirm that the relationship that has been built through blood and common purpose against colonialism and apartheid must be strengthened through properly defined and deepened economic relationships. We must never fall victim to NATO alliance as a peaceful alliance and any other person or any other national territory as a criminal alliance. We stand as the EFF to reaffirm that our relationship with Russia must never be discontinued. We should, on the contrary, strengthen that relationship because it is based on common prosperity and anti-imperialism. Thank you very much.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Honorable Sengwa.
Honorable members, the world finds itself yet again on the brink of economic collapse, hot on the heels of a 2-year-long COVID-19 crisis, which has altered the course of humanity. The socio-economic and socio-political climate is fragile, in need of recovery and newness. Add to this now the latest international crisis in the form of an unequivocally unnecessary invasion of Ukraine by Russia. It is fast escalating into an international humanitarian crisis on top of what the international community is already confronted with in various parts of the world as we grapple with COVID-19 and its after effects, notwithstanding ongoing wars, global terror, and displacement of people. Therefore, at the outset, we must call out Russia on its wrongness. The invasion of Ukraine and the current war is wrong and in total violation of every international statute and protocol in existence or imaginable. The basics are this: Ukraine is a sovereign state in the international community of nations. It has a right to determine its own national interest, and Russia has no right in law or in principle to impose itself on Ukraine in order to determine an agenda for Ukraine. Oppression, dictatorship, and repression must be rejected wherever they manifest themselves in the world. To be pro-Ukraine does not presuppose that one is anti-Russia, nor should being pro-Russia make one anti-Ukraine. Furthermore, those who are friends of Russia are dishonest friends and unworthy of the name if they fail to be frank and call Russia to order and denounce its war-centric attitude towards Ukraine. The hallmark of friendship is honesty and the ability to tell our friends when they are wrong. Thus, the South African government has failed dismally in its attempt to be a voice of reason, freedom, and democracy when it chooses to be half pregnant, being neither fish nor fowl on this glaring violation of human rights and international protocols. Neutrality in a war advances the agenda of the aggressor, in this case, Russia. Russia's own reservations about NATO notwithstanding, it must understand that you don't start a war to prevent a war. Therefore, we must reject the invasion and the war, and Russia must pull out of Ukraine. The United Nations must appoint a special envoy as a matter of urgency to mediate the situation, provided Russia pulls out of Ukraine, and defense, military, and humanitarian assistance must be afforded to Ukraine. Europe must itself be called out for its racism and how it has handled the refugee crisis flowing out of Ukraine. The blatant discrimination towards African and Black nationals has called into serious question the bona fides of the human rights assistance and humanitarian assistance being meted out. Racism must be rejected, especially in a war. If we are committed to justice and democracy, then we must reject this irrational, erratic, and egotistic Putin paranoia-driven war, as we equally reject the One China policy, which oppresses the Taiwanese and Tibetan people, and we must hold true to the principle of a two-state solution in the Israeli-Palestine conflict and reject any human rights violations on both sides. Honorable Deputy Speaker, we must be unwavering in our efforts towards global peace and accept that peace is an act of humanity, not ideology. The loss of life anyway is a loss for humanity, not ideology. Any ideological or political discourse that thrives on and results in war, loss of life, and violence must be rejected, and every effort must be made to bring about peace. The international community must uphold the sovereignty of each state to determine its own suffrage. In conclusion, the international community does not need another war or a distraction. We need global efforts towards economic recovery, development, and growth, and to push back on the frontiers of global poverty, inequality, and unemployment. The Putin madness is an unnecessary
Honorable Member, now your time has expired.
And therefore this with the strongest possible terms and continue.
Honorable Member, your time has expired. Don't stretch it. Honorable Groenewald.
Geachte adjunct speaker, there must be no doubt that each and every person in South Africa is affected by the war in Ukraine. The subject for discussion this day is what is the economic influence and effect in South Africa in terms of the war in the Ukraine. And why do I say that each and every person is affected by that? It is because you have to eat to live. If you go and look what the statistics reveal, we will find and see that 30% of the wheat consumption in South Africa is imported from the Ukraine. That means, and that is the projection, that since 24th of January, if you project it over a year to year, wheat prices will increase with 27%. White maize will increase with 20%. Yellow maize with 21%. It is then no wonder that certain bakeries already announced that there will be a sharp increase in the price of bread because of the war in the Ukraine. And to get to a situation where you think that it doesn't influence you as a citizen or as a person in South Africa because it's far away, then you are misleading yourself. And then I didn't even talk about the influence of fuel prices, the agricultural sector, fertilizers. So in the next season, where farmers are preparing for wheat to plant, they're going to pay a dear price because of this war in Ukraine. And then, Honorable Deputy Speaker, I want to say to the ANC that if you think that just because of the support in your struggle days that you have to look and be in favor of your friend, I want to say to you, you are failing the people of South Africa. A true friend will appreciate sharp criticism if they deserve it. And I think the ANC must ask itself, in the fact that they don't want to condemn in strong terms the war in the Ukraine, the fact that they did not support the resolution of the United Nations, how does Russia see you? Do they see you as a friend or as a useful idiot? That is the fact. En ek wil dit baie duidelik stel. Daar moet geen onduidelikheid wees nie. As 'n land sy tanks en sy troepe instuur in 'n ander land, dan is jy die aggressor. Maak nie saak wat se argumente jy wil gebruik om te sê dat jy dit gedoen het nie. Daar is geen regverdiging nie. En daarom sê die Vryheidsfront Plus dat die inval van Rusland in die Oekraïne moet ten sterkste veroordeel word. And I said it before, the real victims of war are the women and the children, and we see that. I thank you.
Point of order, Speaker.
Yes, what's the point of order?
Yes, Honorable Deputy Speaker, I wanted to raise point of order on the member on the podium because he's misleading the House. He says that only Ukraine supplies 30% of wheat. It's not true. It's both Russia and Ukraine. He must not mislead the House.
Honorable member, that's not a point of order. That's a debating point. Ndadem Rudy.
The ACDP was one of the first parties that called on Russia to withdraw their forces from Ukraine so that dialogue, negotiations, and diplomacy can take place free from violence. Russia's invasion of Ukraine we are debating today is very unfortunate and should not have happened. The stubbornness of political leaders who negotiate in bad faith has resulted in what potentially might descend into Third World War, given that Russia has reportedly requested military and technical assistance from China, while the US, on the other hand, has warned China of serious consequences if she gives assistance to Russia. This is a clear indication that the Russia-Ukraine conflict is not an easy matter that can be resolved by just condemning one side against the other. King Solomon once said, and I quote, "The first one to plead his case seems right until another comes and cross-examines him," close quote. This simply means that we must listen to both sides of the story in any conflict before we pass judgment, which would be skewed and might even exonerate the guilty party. The ACDP does not agree with President Ramaphosa's approach to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. According to media reports, President Ramaphosa has discussed the conflict with Russian President Vladimir Putin, but has not discussed the same conflict with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The ACDP would like to know why President Ramaphosa is not calling President Zelensky just as he called President Putin. He should prevail on both leaders to allow mediation process to end this conflict that is affecting South Africa's economy directly. What affects Ukraine affects Europe, Africa, and the rest of the world. The economies of emerging markets like South Africa are badly hit hard. Rolling blackouts, the legacy of COVID lockdowns, corruption, and poor service delivery have put South Africa in a worse financial position than the one we faced during the global meltdown of 2008. Investor chief economist is also concerned and is saying that the war between Russia and Ukraine, coupled with continued load shedding and the slow implementation of structural reforms, could cause South Africa's economic growth 0.2% this year. Honorable members, the ACDP repeats its call on Russia and Ukraine to allow peaceful mediation to take place, because we are affected negatively by this war. We want peace and not war. And I call on our members to allow both sides and encourage both sides to meet and negotiate rather than stand on grandstands and condemn one against the other. Thank you.
Thank you.
Honorable Deputy Speaker and honorable members, the tension between the NATO countries and Russia is well documented. What the recent invasion of Ukraine has exposed is that the United Nations has become a mere talk shop and is a toothless body with no leadership. Nothing stopped the UN leadership to have met with two parties to resolve the situation before it escalated to war. The UN has failed the Ukrainian people and the Russians who are not in favor of this incursion. Many countries struggle with the challenge of refugees. And even here in South Africa, we find displaced Africans from war-ravaged countries. None of these countries find real support from the UN in terms of housing millions of refugees, never mind feeding them. South Africa and other member states pump membership monies into the UN, but it seems to be funding the bureaucrats in New York. And that money does not benefit the member states in other ways. Finally, South Africa is a shining example of negotiating to resolve conflict. And we have replicated that recipe for other conflict scenarios. The UN could learn a few tricks from our example. However, use of force in order to achieve a political objective must be condemned in the strongest terms. Finally, we need to agree as South Africans on what is our national interest out there. Otherwise, we will be victims of these superpowers. Ayikho kaloku into yoba ngokusilaba ngoFather Christmas. Uxa kukhona i-conflict, ubizwe thina sithumela amajoni ethu phaa awufa kwezi ndawo. Xa kufuneka ngoku kuthiwe make sinikwe ke si-investe kwezo ndawo, ufumanisa uba ngoku ngena kwayezi superpowers. Iyadika le nto mani, make sibe siyixoxe le national interest.
ATM. Is the ATM present? Abek. Good, Honorable Huron.
Deputy Speaker, the global economic impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine has been described by the President of the World Bank as catastrophic. It is a crushing blow to South Africa. We were depending on a resurgent global economy to mitigate the disaster of state capture and to stimulate post-pandemic recovery. We desperately need this recovery. Millions of unemployed South Africans will remain trapped in poverty for as long as our economy fails to grow by at least 3% per annum. Rising commodity prices may well be an outcome of this war and may advantage some sectors of our economy, but equally rising oil prices will be disastrous. Before Putin's invasion, we were predicting our economy would grow by 1.8% this year. But oil prices, which have already doubled in the last 6 months, could trim a full percentage point off this projected growth, which is a devastating setback. But what can we do about it? President Ramaphosa recently indicated that in the course of a discussion with his Russian counterpart, the subject of South Africa playing a role as a mediator was raised. And this is an important development. When South Africa joined BRICS, it was said that although our economy dwarfed those of our BRICS partners, our experience of managing our transformation from apartheid to democracy was of immense global value. This unique capital has already enabled South Africa to contribute to settling conflicts on the other side of the world. In this regard, we can think of our role in advancing peace in Northern Ireland and brokering the Lockerbie deal. The President was himself involved in peace negotiations in Northern Ireland in the late 1990s, and we can draw important lessons from the leadership of President Mandela at this time. When South Africa was approached to mediate in the Northern Ireland conflict, former President Mandela reportedly said that our country does not intervene in the conflict in another country without being invited to do so. Mandela apparently required written requests from all the parties involved. We agree with government that the situation in Ukraine demands negotiation and compromise. We know that President Ramaphosa has spoken to President Putin, but has he also spoken to the Ukraine President Zelensky? Lesson number 2 from the Northern Ireland mediation efforts was Madiba's unequivocal insistence on a ceasefire. Applying this right now means that Russia must withdraw her troops. Deputy Speaker, we stand unequivocally for mediation and peace. We have a roadmap that we have followed once before. Are we willing to use it again? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Honorable Sheikh Imam.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Let me start off by saying any casualties in a war are the people themselves. And the National Freedom Party is of the view that a negotiated settlement would go a long way in preventing the loss of lives. But the question I want to ask today, Honorable Deputy Speaker, is this. When the people in Palestine are losing their lives, being raped and murdered, there's no cry from anybody, no passion. When the same thing happens in Syria, we hear nothing. When the same thing happens in Libya, we hear nothing. When the same thing happens in Iraq, we hear nothing. When the Ukrainians are violating the rights of other Ukrainians, particularly in the Donbass region, there's nobody crying for those people. What is the reason for that? What about India? Why is there nobody in this country raising the concerns of the Indian minorities, of the Christians and the Muslims whose rights are being violated by the Indian government? Nobody in this country is saying anything about it. Now, NATO went on and bombed many of the Russian allies. Russia could do absolutely nothing about it and stayed out of it. What did Russia say? demilitarization. Stay away from my Russian borders. If you notice what has been happening since 1990, they are coming closer and closer and closer to the Russian border until they will make Russia so weak that Russia will have no other option but to give in to them. That is what it is all about. But who is the root cause of this whole problem? It is clearly the West and the United States of America that is the root cause of all the mayhem and chaos and destruction all over the world. Let's talk about the biological laboratories which is funded by the Pentagon in Ukraine. Where is it coming from? Why are they getting involved in those? Let's talk about the number of people that were massacred by the Ukrainians who have been detained without trial. Nobody has said anything about that as well. Okay, let's talk about the shelling of the hospitals and the schools and the massacre and the mass graves that were found in Ukraine. Nobody says anything about that. Now, what is Russia asking for? Russia is saying, stay away from my borders and stay away from me. All you have been doing, and remember, Ukraine is being used as a fool by the United States and the West, and they're falling into the trap like many other countries have fallen in the trap previously, and that's what it is all about. Currently, there is a threat to the Russian Republic as a result of them coming closer to the Russian borders, the eastern side. All Russia is saying, stay away. Do not collude with the West, because the West, we all know, have a hidden agenda. What is their agenda? To want to wipe Russia off the map as well. That is what it is all about. Now we come here and we look at one side of the story. We don't want to give an objective view. Yes, indeed, it is not good to take sides. I agree with whoever said that. But that is what we are doing here. We are forgetting about those people whose rights are being violated by the Ukrainians themselves. Why does the Ukrainians do not comply with the agreement that they've entered into? Exactly what Israel has done, that has violated every agreement that they've entered into. What about the Minsk agreement that they've entered into? What about the agreement in 1990? Why have they continuously been violating those agreements? So let us look at this in an open mind. What is really going on in Russia, Ukraine? We would agree that yes, indeed, that we need to mediate and find a peaceful solution. But you cannot find a peaceful solution when Ukraine has been running away when they've been negotiating a peaceful settlement. They've done it again and again. So that is exactly what it is all about. The National Freedom Party views this in a very serious light. Particularly, I've heard many people talking about wheat. It's time to grow your own wheat. We've got very fertile soil in this country. We don't need to rely on other countries. But the important thing is this. Let us be objective. Let us be objective when we discuss an issue that affects us in this country, even though it is in the foreign soil. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Honorable Masipa.
Hypocrites of note.
Order.
Thank you. Mr. President, let me be clear from the onset. The decision by your ANC government that you took to support Putin's murderous campaign in Ukraine does not represent the generality of South Africans. History will record this as a moral failure on the part of the ANC government, not South Africans. It was the ANC that unashamedly abstained from condemning Russia's actions at the United Nations General Assembly. When you called Mr. Putin to express your support for his bombing campaign in Ukraine, you were doing so on behalf of the corrupt and morally bankrupt ANC. Still in the same spirit, in the spirit of Ubuntu, South Africans whose farmers who are affected by the...
Can you protect me? You're protected. Honorable members, allow the member to make his point.
South Africans in the spirit of Ubuntu, just as they did during COVID, our farmers are donating some of their fruits meant for St. Petersburg to Ukrainians that have been displaced. Honorable President, stop your honeyed words with Putin. He is a warmonger. Mr. President, what is your government's plan to protect the poor against rising food prices and farmers against rising oil prices? Is it not time to consider suspending petrol levies, securing new markets for our farmers, and creating public-private partnership to fix the ports, to capacitate Fosco to produce more fertilizer, to fix the broken animal health institution? The DA call on the department to stop the ill-thought Agricultural Produce Amendment Act that is going to close many markets if legislated in the current format. And we ask this House to seriously consider the amendment of export credit insurance to include cover for perishable goods during unprecedented event. Honorable President, in conclusion, your own version of quiet diplomacy on Russia is making the world a dangerous place. Condemn Putin action now. We stand with Ukraine.
We
stand with Russia.
We stand with Ukraine.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Mahuma Pelo. Honorable Pam Tswete, please mute all of you.
Honorable Mahuma Pelo, you have been called to the podium. You may proceed.
Motlotlegi modulasetulo. Ke re ke dumedisa le botlhe ba ile mmalo kwa komiti khuduthamaga ya rona ya puso. Ke dumedisa le seboka sa batlotlegi botlhe ba kgotlatheo molao ya Afrika Borwa. Bagaetso re mekamekane le setataladi fa. Setataladi se ne ke re mo letsatsi la gompieno re se tote. Mme re se tota ka mokgwa o ntseng jang. One of the recent challenges we have to contend with as the sixth administration is infant political phenomenon of Steenheinism. This infant philosophy is a political residue of global imperialist onslaught on all progressive forces. One of the critical memory lapses this Steenheinism philosophy severely suffers from is saying and doing things in a total disregard of historical contexts. It is inherently anecdotal. It has no capacity to comprehend both historical and dialectical materialism. That is why the DA et al. Will seek us to debate this matter in isolation from geopolitical objective and subjective factors, which among other things will inevitably impact on South Africa, Africa and other members of BRICS and other countries we have relations with as South Africa. The Steenhuisist DA seeks nothing else but for us to unthinkingly attack, isolate, and treat President Putin as an international political skunk and a pariah of modern history. This we shall not do as the African National Congress. Our principal position is that peace among
Honorable
nations.
Mahumapelo, please
has-
wait. Honorable Faber, what you are doing is unparliamentary. You are doing something which is unparliamentary. Don't repeat that. We don't do that in the House. Proceed, Honorable Mahumapelo.
O ne ke re go tlola ka ko strateng motlatsa modulasetulo. Our principal position is that peace among nations has to be achieved through negotiations, no matter the protracted nature of the situation. It is the same thing the DA does in this country, by wanting us to forget that they are the political infants and forever fragile and vulnerable beneficiaries of apartheid colonialism. No matter how many times they seek to change their name for expedient political relevance, which are forever, we will forever be politically vigilant. We refuse. We are adamant, and we shall never allow Steenheinism to set the agenda for the African majority. This philosophy will be fought.
Honorable Mahumapelo, please take your seat. Yes, Honorable Faber.
Honorable Chair, just on a point of order, the Speaker is talking about Steenhuisen. Is he speaking about the leader of the DA, Honorable John Steenhuisen? Please, Chair.
Wait. Honorable members.
Honorable Chair, if you can rule on that, please.
Yes, I will. So far, there's no Steenhuisen that is being talked about. I'll look for the meaning of Steenhuisen in the dictionary, and I will come back and rule on it. Honorable members. Honorable Faber, what is it I've ruled?
Honorable Chairperson, except if my hearing is not that well, but I heard the Speaker speaking about Steenhuisen.
No.
Steenhuisen.
It is Honorable Steenhuisen if he speaks to Mr. Steenhuisen.
Can you take your seats? Let me respond again. No, it is not like that. Proceed, Honorable Mahumapelo.
Bothata ba ditsebe se di sa phepafatsiweng sentle ke ba monkgole fa lona le bothata bo motlotlege. This philosophy will be fought, suffocated until it can breathe no more, because its defeat is the defeat of global imperialist forces that seeks to perpetuate domination over other nations, topple their democratically elected presidents, denies them their rights, including the right to life, and many others. This philosophy of Steenheinism depends and relies on twisted, exaggerated, and sometimes mega dramatic amplifications
Honorable members,
to mislead people in a continuous search for political relevance. Steenheinism, because of its short-sightedness, it will not be able to comprehend that South Africa will neither praise or condemn either Russia or Ukraine, because normalization of the situation to achieve peace has to be through protracted engagements. In addition, South Africa has made it clear that international humanitarian and human rights laws, sovereignty, etc., must form part of the basis for all and sundry to engage on a peaceful resolution of the conflict. The Steenhuisist imperial philosophy shall never be able to comprehend the intricacies and complexities brought about by NATO expansionism tendencies, which shall inevitably elicit a response accordingly from Russia. Imperial residues embedded in Steenheinism suffers from acute memory lapses, which, for instance, ignores not only the fact but the truth that Ukraine became part of Saddam governance system from as far back as 1667.
Honorable, Honorable members, before he speaks,
Honorable Chair, I would
before you speak, we have spoken about this room being too small. So anything you say really disturbs. We can't hear everything that the speaker on the podium is saying. Please. It's not like that big house where we can haggle the way we want. Honorable Faber, what is it?
Chairperson, I just want to make sure if Honorable Suprasm is maybe talking about something else, as I don't understand what he's saying.
Honorable Faber, you are wasting our time. That's not a point of order.
They never went beyond matrica.
What we will help him with, Honorable Chairperson, is supranomics philosophy. Opportunistically, Steenheinism, imperialist et al. Philosophy seeks to instill without success in the minds of the people that they must forget that in 2014, a democratically elected president in Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, was removed through external political influences. The Europe-influenced protests of November 2013 in the capital Kyiv against President Viktor exacerbated the situation. This was concocted and engineered only because President Viktor rejected a deal of greater economic integration with Europe. Steenheinism deliberately sidesteps the truth that France, Germany, Russia, and Ukraine
Honorable House Chair, on a point of order.
Ensure an agreement since February 20.
House Chair, Honorable Mazzoni, on a point of order.
Honorable Mazzoni, I can hear you. Yes, please proceed. Did you raise your hand? Maybe that they didn't check?
I did raise my hand. Unfortunately, I wasn't noticed. But thank you for...
members, please. I can't hear Honorable Mazzoni, please. I will request my table staff to keep their laptops on so that the hands are seen. I'm sorry that we didn't see your hand. May you proceed with your point of order? What is it?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, it's 2 points. One, I'd like to know if the Honourable Mahumapelo is willing to take a question. And secondly, I've just checked the Oxford Dictionary and I have seen that Steenheinism stands for those who fight against tyranny and oppression.
Honourable member.
Honourable Mahumapelo be willing to take a question.
The second one, I'm not even going to take. That's not a point of order. The first one was saying,
if the Honourable Supra Mahumapelo would be willing to take a question.
Are you willing to take a question, Honourable Mahumapelo?
Yes, I'm willing to take a question next week, Wednesday.
Why not now?
Wednesday, 2 o'clock.
Please, let's listen to the question, please.
Well, I was saying, Chair, that I'm very much willing and capable to take the question next week, Wednesday, 3 o'clock.
Okay, thank you very much. Proceed. He's not willing, Honourable Mazzoni. Proceed, Honourable
House Chair, though, can we just have assurance that the Honourable Member will actually be in
April 2014
and not in Russia getting treatment?
Honourable Mazzoni, I didn't allow you to continue speaking. What is it now? He said he's not responding to your question. You keep on talking, and I didn't give you that permission. Please.
Sorry, Madam Chair, we can't hear.
Proceed, Honourable Mazzoni. Please, don't do that. If you do that again, I'll have you removed from the platform. Proceed, Honourable Mahumapelo.
This philosophy seeks to rob us of the truth that in April 2014, pro-Russian separatist activists resulted in self-declared People's Republics of Donetsk and Lugansk, whose demands range from self-rule to union with Russia. But because Steenheinism is inherently embedded in self-praise, it seeks to mislead people that the only right thing to do is to ignore these realities and condemn President Putin. Furthermore, Proponents of imperial residues expressed through this philosophy cannot run away from the truth that a second ceasefire agreement called Minsk II came into effect on the 15th of February 2015, and it has also not achieved much. It is therefore important, honorable members, that we should try to take effort in exposing remnants of imperial ideas affiliation embedded in this parliament by re-emphasizing the point that South Africa's position during special UN Assembly voting process on the conflict of Russia-Ukraine is not neutrality. Our position can be described as having proven our principledness.
Thank
this
you,
means
Honorable
that
Mahuma Pelo. Thank Just be sure we have not taken any of your time with the point of orders. We always switch the thing off. Honorable Steenhuisen.
Madam Speaker, I would really like to make a motivation that we give the Honourable Mamapelo some more time to speak. I was really enjoying his explanation of Steenhuisenism, and I think the House could do with a good dose of it.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are working according to the rules of this House.
You must use that time to go write this metric.
Honorable members, let's proceed and call on order. The chief whip of the majority party and the leader of the opposition allow us to proceed. Can we please proceed to Honorable Jafta?
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Honorable Chair, we enter this debate at a critical time in the history of the world. Global peace is at its lowest. Food security is threatened. Climate change is on our doorstep. Protectionist policies continue to lock out emerging economies. War is now preferred over dialogue. Human rights are violated with impunity. Honorable members, I sketch out all these global challenges in order to highlight the devastating impact on the Russian invasion in Ukraine. Our views on this debate are therefore informed by our commitment to global peace, global security, to human rights, and to the national sovereignty of states. The impact of this war to South Africa, to Africa, and to the globe was well articulated yesterday by the United Nations Secretary General. In his statement, he issued a stern warning that this war, I quote, is also an assault on the world's most vulnerable people and countries, close quote. Among his concerns was the impact of this invasion on the global food value chain, especially because the world's 45 least developed countries import at least 1/3 of their wheat from Ukraine or Russia. We also studied reports from other international agencies and Future for South Africa, and Future for South Africa looks bleak. These are the facts we established, Honorable Chair. South Africa imports between 70% and 80% of the fertilizer used in its agriculture industry from, amongst others, Russia as the country's dominant trade partner. This means the agricultural sector will severely be affected by this war. This will in turn affect crop yield and the cost of food for consumers. As the demand for fertilizers increases, supply will be eroded. Secondly, fuel prices will continue to take a hammer. Russia is our main source of gas, coal, fuel, and oil. Load shedding will worsen as the cost of diesel increases. This will affect Eskom's emergency electricity stream supply, which largely relies on diesel and coal. Consumers will be hard hit, and the gap between the rich and the poor will be widened. Given all these challenges, the world has to unite. Our stance, Honorable Chair, has always been that dialogue and negotiations between the realistic, prompt and informed by our commitment to human rights, food security, and global peace. We urge all the role players.
Thank you very much, Honorable Jafta. Thank you.
To advance the well-being of all citizens of the world. I thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Madisha.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. People of the world have risen to condemn the killings of the poor people in Ukraine and have even committed themselves as the international community to lay down their own lives to save the remaining people of Ukraine. As we speak now, more than 2.9 million women and children, grandfathers and grandmothers have run away from their own motherland to escape the horrendous attacks from Russia. Young men and the youth are fighting to protect their own motherland. But South Africa, which has received support from the international community when South Africa fought for freedom and democracy, has basically risen to support the killers. I say they have reason to support the killers because when the people of the world came together in the General Assembly to say no to the massacres of the ordinary people, the ANC government said, please do it alone. We won't support peace. What a shame. This is extremely terrible. Now, when we come back home, we are speaking about the economic problems that we face as a country as a sequel to the problems that are happening there in Ukraine. Sanctions and other forms of punishment declared on Russia by the international community will negatively affect South Africa and all her people. For example, fuel prices, the main driver of inflation, will negatively affect every South African. 2, agricultural businesses, inter alia, SAB Miller, farms maintenance, food supply chain will be affected negatively. SWIFT, that is the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, from which Russia is now excluded, will also hit South Africa very hard. 4, whether South African government accept it or not, unemployment in South Africa will rise further. All this will, without doubt, lead to a lower GDP performance than in 2021. Even, for example, the 77 billion rand businesses South Africa has with Russia will be affected. 7, Russia's major banks have been hit with sanctions, and this will affect South Africa as well. I refer to, amongst others, VTB Bank, Bank Okritić, OJSC, Novicom Bank, Ster Bank, etc. Now, these are the kind of problems which we are going to be faced with. And South Africa, what they have done is extremely evil. Thank you.
Honorable Nyonso.
House Chairperson, honorable members, we are again assembled here to discuss the superpower conflict over their security and spheres of influence based on the American Monroe Doctrine. In the 1960s, based on this doctrine, the United States President Kennedy forced the Russian President Khrushchev not to put any missiles or nuclear weapons in Cuba. The world at that time stood still, asking itself who will blink first. The Russians did. Today, Russia's Putin is attacking Ukraine in order to prevent Biden's America and NATO putting their weapons and nuclear missiles at its doorsteps. The PAC's long-standing foreign policy on the relations with superpowers is that we do not choose sides in their fight unless they affect Africa and humanity. It is clear that this fight will affect Africa and other poor nations of the world. In that, the fight already has ensured that the prices of oil, petrol, gas have gone sky high, and inflation has also risen. We therefore take a stand and roundly condemn both America and Russia for threatening world peace, Africa and humanity's livelihood with a third world war, which is actually a European war over their spheres of influence. The PAC therefore condemns Russia and America's abuse of power and bully tactics which affect the lives and livelihoods of especially Africa and humanity, and call on them to stop immediately the war over Ukraine and negotiate peacefully whatever differences they may have over Ukraine. As we condemn them, we cannot refrain from further observing that the Western imperialist countries like US and UK, who when they meet their match in Russia, are not as brutal and destructive as what we saw in Libya and Iraq. Finally, we call on the superpowers, including Russia and America, to do away with nuclear weapons, and the doctrinal spheres of influence between America and Russia must be abandoned. The Security Council must be reformed to remove the veto powers of the superpowers, and the continent of Africa and other continents must have permanent seats in the Security Council. I thank you.
Thank you. The Honorable Hendricks.
Thank you, Honorable House Chair. Honorable House Chair, Al-Jama generally concurs with the position that was adopted by President Ramaphosa. Al-Jama agrees with meaningful engagement. It is time now for the invasion to stop, or at least a ceasefire and human corridors to be established so that more meaningful engagement can take place. Those who stand with Israel is quiet when Israel president is implementing President Ramaphosa's meaningful negotiation. Dozens of world leaders are involved in meaningful negotiation, including Turkey, at the request of NATO and America and Germany. So what we heard from the official opposition in the House today is all thunder but no lightning. They undermine South Africa's positions, which is close to being very unpatriotic. You can't undermine a commander-in-chief, and for Al-Jama, we are already in a third world war. Al-Jama is concerned not only about the development of Ukraine, but about our African economies, which is directly and indirectly destroyed by the war. South Africa's economy is injured by this war. Our economy is being scuttled. The South African government and we as political parties must collectively think out of the box and not inside the box like some of our other political parties are doing, by pursuing methods in not only mending this ailing and frail economy, but also growing and expanding it in inventive ways. As a country, we should gather our energies to counter the serious situation, and we should apply desperate measures in dealing with our affairs as best as we can so that we in our region can be economically afloat. We ask that meaningful engagement now be taken to the next level. Thank you very much, Honorable House Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Hendricks.
ANC Light.
Is that Honorable Faber, please allow us to proceed. The Honorable Minister of Social Development, Minister Zulu.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. Respectfully to the House, all members of the House, first and foremost, neki kupa gore ke leboge all those members who stood here from the different political parties ba ile ba bona hore ho bohlokwa hore ba bue ka khotso ba ile ba bona hore situation e reng ko Russia le ko Ukraine ke situation e batla peace ba ile ba understand hore in order for peace to happen re tshwanetse hore ba thuse re le mmuso wa South Africa to get to that peace. Standing here, Honorable Chair, I know that there are those who have said, oh, she studied in Russia and therefore. Yes, I studied in Russia. And yes, I wouldn't have studied in Russia had I not been prosecuted and be thrown out of the borders of South Africa and find myself in the cold, not because I wanted to be there, simply because apartheid made it difficult for us. Having said that, I also want those who say so to appreciate and understand that Russia, being a country that supported us during difficult times, nothing stops us from engaging and saying, when there are challenges and problems, let us sit and talk about them. This very country that I enjoy is freedom, and many on my left who enjoy is freedom because it was delivered upon them on a silver platter. I want to tell them today that negotiations was a difficult moment for us as South Africans, and negotiations needed us to compromise, and we did. Negotiations we knew was going to bring the South Africa we have today. Therefore, Honorable Chairperson, those who speak because they want to continue to create fear amongst our people. In the past, there was Swat Khefar. Today, there's something which I think is almost like ANC Khefar. I don't know if there's anything like that. But the bottom line is this, Chairperson. We live in a country where our president, President Cyril Ramaphosa, speaks. He is your president too. President Cyril Ramaphosa, he is called upon to engage in peaceful negotiations. And the fact that some member says, did he speak to the president of Ukraine? You don't know about that. So don't talk about things you don't know. President Cyril Ramaphosa will speak to the president of Ukraine when the president avails himself to speak. Because this country called South Africa understood from the very beginning that negotiations is about two sides that are in a war or in a conflict. And in this particular case, I can assure you, honorable members, that President Cyril Ramaphosa will speak to both sides to make sure that both sides are brought to the table. What actually sometimes is surprising, Chairperson and honorable members, is that we took a decision to negotiate, and we sat with people who we never thought we would sit with. And we sat and we did the negotiations, and thank God, look at the country that we have today. So let me also indicate that we are driven to negotiations not because of anything. Those of you who are making noise, you don't know that war. You've never felt that war. You've never lived in that war. All you know is to come and sit in this house and make noises about a war that you never felt nor experienced. And Chairperson, let me also say the war that is raging, the conflict that is raging, the most people who are affected by it are the women and children. And let me say to you, honorable members, do not be one-sided about the women and children who have been affected by this conflict. And I think the honorable members from my side of the African National Congress have clearly elaborated, and I will not go into that. But what is important is this is going to affect us all, and therefore it's important for us to see where do we engage so that there can be peace. However, Chairperson, let me also indicate that we are driven by what is in the Freedom Charter, that there shall be peace and friendship, not only in South Africa, not only in Africa, but the entire world. And however, Chairperson, we are very conscious of the fact that approaching and treating the symptom of this conflict in isolation from underlying causes does not help to remedy the destabilizing situation into which we are being drawn. Instead, treating symptoms provide the opportunity for incurable cancers to spread. Coming to this particular issue that we are discussing here, we must not lose sight of the fact that we believe that the peace, friendship, and neighborliness between Russia and the Eastern Bloc countries is a matter that, without undue external influences, interferences, and enticements, the countries of that region can settle between themselves. And we're not talking about one country, we are talking about all those countries. And again, Chairperson, let me tell you and the honorable members, conflicts that have been raging in the African continent itself, we have been involved in finding those solutions to those conflicts. That is why South Africa can be called beyond political parties, beyond the African National Congress. There are members that contributed to peace process in South Africa who are still being called by the world to come and assist in negotiations. So when we stand here, Chairperson, we are not standing saying things. We say the things that we say because we believe in them. When we are standing here, Chairperson, we've seen war. We don't read about it in the newspapers. We don't read about it we don't Google the war. We lived it, we felt it, we know it. And today, Chairperson, we fast forward to what is happening, and we must remind ourselves that coming out of the Second World War, the United States, United Kingdom, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, and Portugal formed what is called today NATO. Those who care to know, they must ask themselves the question, why was it formed? And those who want to be truthful in history, they will tell you that exactly what the other members of the African National Congress were talking about here. Russia is simply saying, and for years has been saying.
Thank you, Honorable Minister.
Thank you.
Honorable Cuthbert, please. Hey, Honorable Cuthbert, Assembly. Proceed, Honorable Kachalia.
In 1939, Winston Churchill said, "This is no war of domination or imperial aggrandizement or material gain, no war to shut out any country of its sunlight and means of progress. It is a war viewed in its inherent quality to establish on impregnable rocks the rights of the individual, and it is a war to establish and revive the stature of man." 83 years later, after valiant attempts, many in vain, to uphold international law, this is where Ukraine finds itself with Russia's invasion. Without any plausible casus belli, employing a massive use of military force against civilians and the attempted hunting down of a legitimately elected government. Lamentably, the stance by our government, tardy, contradictory, placatory, and wet, now makes us party to a 19th century playbook on imperialism, a push to establish empire by any means, however brutal and destructive, and augmented by the methods and tactics of the KGB, Honorable Zulu. As in all wars, lies abound, and the grand lie that liberal values create the basis for the conflict of civilizations chimes well with this government and its communist allied party. It is a view that resonates with our government, defined by venality in its cozy relationship with Putin. And so to those who have spoken before, to appease and apologize to those who have attempted via much whataboutery, Honorable Sheikh and Hendrickse, to absolve themselves of a clear moral obligation, we say there comes a time when we must confront the current evil with a view to establishing an international order that says never again, and that uses this moment as a benchmark to address all transgressions, many of which in the past were unfairly predicated by might and the protection of spheres of influence. To the ANC and Honorable Zulu, tardy as they are now and tardy as they and the SACP were in support for the war against Nazi Germany until Mother Russia entered the fray, and who are now complicit by virtue of an absence of a clear denunciation of Putin's imperialism, best you listen, because there comes a precipitous moment in the life of every nation that calls for courage and honor. Do the right thing. The world is watching and history will judge. Infantile references apart, from an economic perspective, South Africa exports more to Swaziland and Lesotho than to Russia. So Honorable Mahumapelo, who was fired from his province, be Putin that in your samovar and drink it. You have been schooled by Steenhuisenism, which is an ascending philosophy. Now go and do the right thing, for God's sake.
Thank you. Order, order, honorable members. Order, order, honorable members. I'm now inviting the Deputy Minister of Finance, Dr. Masonto.
Madam Speaker, honorable members, in his address to the House last week, the Finance Minister briefly remarked on the likely impact of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine on our fiscal framework and revenue estimates. Today, we elaborate on the likely impact of the conflict on our overall economy as per the aim of today's parliamentary session. Let me start by saying that we are deeply concerned by the loss of lives, the humanitarian impact, and the forced displacement of people as a result of this conflict. We also recognize the effects of the conflict, which will not be only be felt in Ukraine and Russia, but across the world. We therefore reiterate the call for silencing of the guns and a return to a meaningful dialogue, negotiation, and compromises. This conflict carries with it significant risks for the global and the local economy, both of which are yet to be fully realized. The conflict will significantly intensify some of the risks that we've already highlighted in the Budget Review 2022. The following are the three main channels through which the South African economy will be impacted by this conflict. The first is the prospect of persistent supply and demand shocks and imbalances, which risks driving inflation higher and tightening financial market conditions. On the supply side, as other honorable members have already indicated, already there have been sharp increases in the price of crude oil, maize, wheat, and sunflower oil due to supply-side disruptions. This is the logic of supply and demand. Where there's low supply and high demand, the prices always increase. Again, as other members have said, higher fuel prices will add to inflation, which will in turn reduce the disposable incomes of consumers at the time when they are already struggling with the negative impact of COVID-19. Local fuel prices have risen to more than 21 rand per litre for the first time ever in March. This is unprecedented and has a potential to completely disrupt our economic recovery efforts. This, Madam Speaker, makes the work that we have embarked on with the Department of Minerals, Resources and Energy to review the approach to fuel pricing an urgent exercise. We are working tirelessly to complete the work as soon as possible. We cannot make any hasty decisions, as any changes we make on fuel pricing will have a lasting impact on the industry and the broader economy. In the meantime, we encourage those industries that qualify for the diesel rebates on the fuel and on the road accident fund to apply for the facility. The adverse effects of the developments in Ukraine have not spilled over to South Africa significantly, with the rand having depreciated only by 1.3% in the wake of the conflict. The changes in the global growth outlook may impact South Africa through the outlook for our main trading partners. Current predictions indicate that the impact of the conflict will lower the overall global GDP by around 0.2% this year, but the impact on each region will vary. The second channel through which the South African economy may be impacted relates to our trade links with the rest of the world. While direct trade between South Africa and Russia, as well as between South Africa and Ukraine, is not substantial, the shock to the global trade will have an impact on the demand for exports as well as import prices. Less than 1% of South Africa's exported goods are destined for Ukraine and Russia combined. On the other hand, import flows from both countries is also less than 1%. The bulk of South Africa's exports to Russia are agricultural, mainly citrus and other fruits, while imports are dominated by copper, wheat, and agrochemicals such as fertilizer. The citrus industry exports approximately 7 to 10% of the South Africa's production to Russia. As such, the consequence of the conflict and the sanctions on Russia may pose some risks to the delivery and payment of these volumes. I understand that the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development is working with the industry to consider alternative markets should the conflict persist. Despite the identified risks, there's potential improvements in South Africa's export commodity performance to fill in the demand for primary commodities. This could continue supporting the mining sector and our public finances. We expect that the rally in export commodity prices will provide added support to the local mining sector. Gold prices have surged globally, rising to their highest prices in a year, mainly due to metal status as safe haven asset. Because during this crisis, usually investors prefer to invest in safe assets such as gold. We've also seen a resurgence in palladium and rhodium prices supported by the easing of the supply shortages that hit the automotive industry in 2020 and 2021. The third channel through which South Africa could be affected is via the financial links. Madam Speaker, although we are concerned about the impact of the conflict on capital flows into the South African economy, our trade and financial links with both nations are relatively small. This is expected to provide consideration insulation against the trade and financial shocks caused by the ongoing conflict. Although South Africa's sovereign risk is likely to increase, the potential depreciation in the domestic currency is expected to boost our export and contribute towards improvement in the current accounts. The economic consequences will be severe for Ukraine and Russia and significant for Europe. But unless there's a serious escalation, the effects on the US, China, and most of the emerging world will be limited. With the situation still developing and fraught with uncertainty, it's not easy at this stage, Honorable Madam Speaker and honorable members, to fully quantify the potential impact of the conflict. What we can do in the meantime is to protect ourselves from this external uncertainty by maintaining a balanced framework we propose in the budget. Madam Speaker, it is prudent for me to emphasize what President Cyril Ramaphosa has already said, that any resolution to the conflict and the resulting peace agreements must be grounded in diplomacy, dialogue, and mediation. Our approach is rooted in Article 4 of the United Nations, which reads, in part, open quote, parties to any disputes, the continuance of which is likely to endanger the maintenance of international peace and security, shall first seek a solution by negotiation, inquiry, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, judicial settlement, resort to regional agencies or arrangements or other peaceful means of their own choice, close quote. We fully support this principle and stand ready to support the process of reaching a peaceful end to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. I thank you Honorable Speaker and honorable members.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Honorable members, that concludes the debate. Before I ask the secretary, okay. V. Pratno. Ekes Dibas. Honorable members, before we proceed to ask the secretary to read the second order, I must just say before time that all the whips, please prepare for your members.
Well, those remarks by the Deputy Minister of Finance, David Masondo, ending this afternoon's session of the debate that was called in Parliament as an urgent matter of national public importance, as Parliament stated. This was the impact of the Russian Federation's invasions of Ukraine on the South African economy. We've heard from the leader of the opposition, John Steenhuisen. We also heard from Minister of Social Development, Lindiwe Zulu, plus several other speakers from the governing party, the ANC and the DAs, John Steenhuisen, the opposition, and also from Floyd Shivambu of the EFF, and as well as Mkhuleki Hlengwa of the IFP. Those are just among other speakers who made their remarks earlier this afternoon.